everyone, and welcome to No Off Season. I'm Chantel Jennings.
And I'm Sabreena Merchant.
And today on the show, as Selection Sunday gets closer, we already have a pretty good idea of the three top number one seeds, UConn, South Carolina, and UCLA. But the big question is, who's going to claim that fourth and final top seed? With all the surprise upsets, parity, and strength of schedule, we're breaking down the teams that could potentially secure that last top spot. But first, we had some breaking news on Monday, Sabreena. We've confirmed that the WNBA reached its revenue-sharing target for the first time during the 2025 season, and now there will officially be revenue sharing between the league and players. Sabreena, what can you tell us about this news?
Right, so we've talked about revenue sharing as it exists in the current collective bargaining agreement on this show before, and essentially how it works is in the 2020 CBA, there was a system whereby there was a target each year that the league had to clear in terms of revenue. And if it exceeded that target, then that money would be shareable with the players. And that target went up by 20% each year over the life of the CBA, and it was a cumulative target. So because 2020 and 2021 were pandemic seasons, the WNBA didn't hit the target, was very short of that target, I should say, during those first two seasons because of the lack of revenue during the pandemic seasons. So it wasn't something that was really considered up until there was this massive boom in revenue in 2024 and 2025. 2025, they finally got to an overage, and that overage was $16 million that got to be shared with the players. And so that $16 million, half of it goes to league marketing agreements. You think about all the things that players do during the off seasons where they're doing like WNBA camps and cares events and stuff with their sponsors. And then the other $8 million goes in payments directly to the players. So you think about the salary cap of the WNBA was about $1.5 million last season. Average salary per player is about $120,000. For an additional $8 million to be dispersed among the players is a pretty significant number. And when we're talking about collective bargaining negotiations, it just speaks to the financial situation that the league finds itself in, however you might make of that.
Well, yeah, I feel like this leads perfectly into our deal or no deal segment, because I feel like the leagues has been sort of saying, and again, we don't know their math. We haven't seen their numbers. They won't open their books to us or anyone, that they're going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars under this revenue share model. And suddenly, right after the league's revenue assessment which was handed over to the Players Union, we should say, on February 9th. So they had time to analyze it and have their own accountants look at it. There is clearly some revenue to be shared. They weren't operating at a loss. Like, how do we sort of view, without knowing the exact math, without knowing the exact numbers, like how does this change the way that you're looking at the argument on both sides of this CBA argument?
Right. Now, the league has contended that with the Players Union proposal, the league would lose $460 million over the life of this current agreement. And we should say that that proposal projects a salary cap of about $9.5 million. So if you think about last season's salary cap was $1.5 million per team, that's a $8 million difference. So 8 times 9, that's $120 million per year. So you can see why there would be shareable revenue in the previous agreement and not what the WNBA contends is shareable revenue in the current agreement. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But I do think that the financial health of the WNBA, even after going through the 2 pandemic seasons, rebounded to a point like where this revenue sharing was triggered. And that's an important marker, right? Like the players were working for 6 years to get to that, right? Starting in 2020 and to finally get it in 2025. I don't think it's an accident that the union shared this information, that they wanted the public to know that, hey, WNBA is making some money. We got to share in it. And here's exactly how much money we got to share in, because as we mentioned so many times, the heart of the discussion in these negotiations has been how much revenue can the WNBA actually share with the players in the new collective bargaining agreement. And the proposal from the WNBA gives about 15% of gross revenue to the players. The players have been trying to get in the neighborhood of 30%. Their most recent proposal is right around 27.5% of gross revenue. So clearly still a big divide there. And even though there was revenue available under a previous agreement, that isn't to say that the WNBA is necessarily obfuscating about its numbers this time around. It's just there's a lot more expenses that will be incurred in the new agreement with all of the additional salary and with charter flights and, all the other minimum staffing standards and things that the WNBA is including in this particular agreement. All that being said, congrats to the WNBA for hitting the target. Like, it's a good thing, I think, in broadest terms, like a good thing that they managed to hit this number that they set out in 2020 and even after all of the losses they incurred in the first 2 years of that agreement.
I feel like it's the perfect example of how you can have an argument that sort of like cuts both ways, where it's like you could see both the players in the league saying like the price today is not the price of yesterday, where it's like, yes. And obviously these revenue sharing models are different. And so there is revenue sharing happening under the previous model, which had specific targets. And again, we talked on this podcast ad nauseum about gross versus net revenue for the league and the players. And feel free to listen back to all of those podcast episodes. But it'll be interesting to see sort of how this all plays out. I think, we're kind of in the point of the negotiations, too, of like the public perception and how much pressure that can sort of create. And like, does the fact that the players, this is out there now, does this benefit the players more in their argument? Is there more public pressure on the league because of that? Or, what way is this going to work? I'm fascinated to sort of see how the winds blow on that. But we should
also
bring
reported,
back deal.
That there was a new proposal sent, right?
I was going to say,
as of last week.
Deal or no deal, proposal or no proposal, not including marriages, as you and Zena had brought up last time. This is just proposal or no proposal, and there's been a proposal. Sabreena, what can you tell us?
The players had shared their most recent proposal as of last Tuesday. That was February 17th. The league responded on Friday, February 20th. Their revenue structure was largely unchanged in this current proposal, but it did sort of change the math on how expenses would be taken out of the net revenue calculation. Even so, the total share of gross revenue that the players would receive is still in the neighborhood of 15%. What the league did agree to was full housing for all players in the 2026 season, which has been a benefit throughout the history of the WNBA, but something that the league has tried to phase out in these negotiations because of the rise in salary, thinking that the players could secure these accommodations on their own. And then there's also some other ancillary benefits like improved 401k, a retirement benefit for players who had 8 years of service in the WNBA and things like that. You can check out the story online for all of the nitty-gritty details of the money that would be coming the players' way in this new agreement. But I think the main thing to focus on is that we're still dramatically apart in terms of how the league and the players want to share the revenue and how much of the revenue will be shared, with the players. But again, worth noting that at least in both of the proposals, revenue is directly tied to the salary cap in a way that it was not in this current CBA, where you had to get these like random bonus payments if a certain target was hit, right? Like, at least in the new agreement, whether the WNBA's proposal is, what direction it goes in, or the WNBPA's proposal, the revenue will determine the overall salary cap, and, you'll see increases that are directly tied to how much revenue the league brings in.
Do you have a sense of why the housing is such a big part of the players' argument? Like, why do they care so much about housing when we're sort of seeing these minimums go up to $200,000+ and the average is going to be $500,000? And I understand the markets are all completely different. I live in Minneapolis, but the Minneapolis market is different than Brooklyn or Golden State, but it's also different than Dallas. Like, why is the housing such a sticking point for players?
Well, part of it is that it was just taken away in one of the league's proposals, and that was a dramatic change from how things had previously been done. But also, you think about just the life cycle of a WNBA player. They play in market for no more than 6 months during the season. And so it's hard to find a place for 6 months if you don't plan on living there your entire year, right? Because a lot of players end up going overseas or going to Unrivaled or Athletes Unlimited, and they have to be elsewhere from their WNBA market. And are you just like paying for a place while you're not there? Like, all of that is a challenge. And then you think about just the calendar. People get drafted in April and they are expected to find a place by the start of training camp a week later, or they sign in free agency, especially this season where free agency will probably bleed into April, and then they immediately have to find a new place to live. So it's just a matter of like safety, convenience, all of these things that are easier to accomplish for a team if they're doing things like in bulk and finding like a group of 15 apartments in a building as opposed to individual people trying to sort
Everyone
out
on
these
their own.
issues for
Yep.
themselves. Yeah, exactly.
Makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, why don't we move on to the Sabreena scale? I'm not going to sing it. Sabreena, we're going to take a look at a few
musical
teams.
interlude here that plays?
I know. At some point, I feel like that should just happen. Every time Xena doesn't sing it, I'm like a little disappointed. And so I feel bad that I am also not doing it, but I also don't feel bad. So we're going to take a look at a few teams that caught your eye this past weekend. Let's kick it off with TCU, who extended their home winning streak to 41 games with an 80-73 win over Iowa State. This is TCU's fourth straight Big 12 conference win. What's clicking for them right now?
Yeah, the Big 12 is a weird conference. I've had a couple of friends refer to it as the mid 12 because everybody's sort of
just clip that. Just clip that.
Just locked in with each other.
Just clip that. The Big 12 is a weird conference. End pod.
But I do think TCU has separated itself in a way that they can be considered a national contender, at least to get to the Elite Eight in a way that other teams in this conference aren't necessarily being talked about that way. And it really comes down to Olivia Miles. Like, we saw her against Baylor a couple weeks ago hit 10 3-pointers, and this is the same Olivia Miles that was not even attempting threes when she was at Notre Dame before she tore her ACL, and you could guard her essentially on any ball screen action by going under and taking off, her access to the paint because she wasn't going to be able to shoot capably. She wasn't even a good free throw shooter. And now, she's turning into that long distance threat we saw against Iowa State, where she just completely took over that fourth quarter, scored 17 points, and it wasn't even with a single 3-pointer. It was all just like mid-range actions and unfortunately abusing our dear beloved Audie Crooks and her pick and roll defense. So I think that was a matchup that they were able to target quite effectively. But yeah, I look at TCU, and we talk so much about how guard play matters in March and getting deep runs into the tournament. And Notre Dame kind of reached this Sweet 16 ceiling with Olivia Miles and her time there. We'll see if TCU, who managed to make the Elite Eight last year by beating an Olivia Miles Notre Dame team, can do better than that this season. But I just look at a player like her who has so much experience in college, who has become so comfortable in navigating every sort of offensive situation that she sees. And it's hard to bet against a player like that because of all of the things she's capable of. And then you add in the fact that, like, they have good defense at the center spots, and Taylor Bigby's hitting a lot of threes now. I'm still concerned about the overall depth, but no team really has as much depth as I would want in this particular season. And I think that's why TCU has sort of come back up. It's just not a lot of teams have a player as good as Olivia Miles.
I mean, I think TCU is going to be one of those challenging teams as, we're getting to March and I'm starting to think about my bracket that I'm going to have to publish and all of, I'm already arguing myself on like certain teams that I'm like, I should, without even knowing what the bracket is going to look like. And I think TCU is one of those teams that I'm thinking about already because it's like, what do we like during March? We like good guard play. We like consistent scorers and we like veterans. And it's like TCU, as you mentioned, doesn't have a ton of depth, but Marta Suarez, 130 plus games. Olivia Miles, 130 games. Like, these are two proven scorers who have had lengthy careers. We've talked about the sense of urgency and what that can mean in March when you're a fifth-year senior. Like, this is their last go-around. TCU is the school they decided to do it at. They've made it to the Elite Eight before as a program, not with these players, but it's like Mark Campbell has gotten a team there before of a lot of, newer faces, and it looks like that's going to be his equation moving forward at TCU. Can he do it with this group? I think it entirely relies upon whether or not Olivia and Marta show up really, really well every single night of the tournament, and they need to be playing at 120%, and if they're not, they're going to lose, and if they are, they have a really good shot of winning against maybe not every team in the field, but I'd say a lot of teams, especially depending on what seed they're going to get. And so I'm just really fascinated by TCU. The Big 12, 2 teams overall in the top 25 net, like, not a great conference, not a super strong conference. So it's like you can watch those games and take from them what you will. Not a lot all the time. And even so, I look at Marta, I look at Olivia, and I think there's enough there, I think, for a Sweet 16 potential Elite 8 run. If things get really wild and special, maybe a Final Four, but probably not. I don't know. Don't clip that
I think
part.
we should leave it at that. I like that part.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. All right. Well, why don't we shift over to the Big Ten? We're going to talk about a team that you wanted to cover, Minnesota. A couple of weeks ago, they weren't even in your rankings. Last week, you had them at number 23. They've climbed to number 18. I will say I went to the barn this weekend to take in a game, not as a reporter, but as a mom. I took my 3-year-old. You know, fun fact, if you go to a basketball game with a 3-year-old, you're not going to see much of a basketball game. We stayed for a little more than 3 quarters. We went to the bathroom 3 times. We got a hot dog. We got green ice cream. And I just want to say, whoever has decided these portion sizes for ice cream at the barn, I don't like you. You are not welcome in our home ever, because it's way too much. My 3-year-old ate almost all of it. Anyways, so Minnesota, they lost to Michigan State Sunday, but obviously had a huge win over Ohio State. They're a team that at this point seems to be trending up. What are your thoughts on the Gophers?
Well, I was hoping you'd have more analysis other than just the ice cream at the barn. But the fact that your daughter wanted green ice cream, I think, was probably a good indicator for the Spartans that night.
Sure.
Yeah, who knows? But Minnesota, a team that the net loves a lot more, I think, than most polls do. They are at 8 in the net rankings right now, which is obscene. Like, literally higher than TCU, a team that we spent this long talking about. But it's a team that doesn't turn the ball over very much, a team that gets a lot of depth of scoring from up and down its roster. I do think the game at Michigan State was something of an outlier just in terms of how poorly they shot. 5 of 17 from Amaya Battle, 2 of 15 from Grace Krukolski. Like, it's you can't win games like that. And I think when you're going to take 15 more shots than your opponent, you're going to put yourself in a good position when you're not going to lose by double digits at home. So I'm inclined to think of that as an outlier, especially because of all the wins they've collected to this point in the Big Ten. I mean, they could finish top 4 in the Big Ten in a really good conference that's going to have hosting teams like Michigan, Iowa, UCLA, So I'm overall just very impressed with how Minnesota has sort of rebounded from a couple of missteps in their non-conference schedule. I was really high on them at the start of the season, then they go and lose to Kansas and things just sort of came a little undone, but they've rebounded quite nicely. It's a group that's been together for a while too. I love consistency at this time of year. And they had like a 4-year senior honored on senior night, how often does this happen anymore? Like, players who have been in a program this whole time. But yeah, I think the turnover rate is really what interests me the most, just because they create so many opportunities to score. They put themselves in position to like get a good shot every time. And when you have like a good inside presence like Sophie Hart or, good shooters, again, that was not the case against Michigan State, but broadly speaking, like they only turned the ball over 9 times against Ohio State, and that's a press team, right? So I like a team that takes care of the ball that much. I still think whether they get to host or not is a really interesting conversation because, again, obviously the net likes them a lot, but there's still a narrative I think that they're trying to overcome here. And maybe that's something we could talk with Eden about. But I pleasantly surprised by how the Gophers have put together this stretch in January and February. I will quibble with the broadcast that said that they were the hottest team in the Big Ten coming in on Sunday. Like, UCLA exists. I understand Minnesota might be the hottest team in the middle part of the Big Ten. But yeah,
maybe
a very good team.
About UCLA.
Been a fun watch.
I think the interesting thing about Minnesota, we talk about TCU not having a ton of depth. Like, Minnesota truly ran with like 5 players against Michigan State. And like you said, a ton of consistency there. You've got players like Sophie Hart, who feel like they've been there forever. Amaya Battle, who feels like they've been there forever. Mara Braun, out last season, been there forever. And so you just have this consistency, and a lot of these players are from the state of Minnesota. So even though Tori McKinney is only a sophomore, she's from Minnetonka. She like probably grew up playing North Tartan basketball with all these girls, knows all of them from AAU open gym days in the area. So there's just a lot of familiarity, I think, and that sort of consistency can serve you really well. But when it comes to depth in the tournament, you're playing, 2 games in 3 days, and you're traveling, and you only have 5 players that are all playing like 32, 34, 38 plus minutes a game. Like, that's kind of it can be a slog of a tournament for some players. And so I'll be curious to see what happens there. On the Michigan State side, I will say, again, I didn't get to watch a ton of the game. I've watched highlights back, and I'm like, oh, wow, interesting. This would be a good challenge, sending people to a basketball game with a 3-year-old to see how much you can actually learn. The Kennedy Blair experience in person is fun. I think there are those players that just sort of pop more in person than on TV. That's not true all the time, and that's not always super consistent, but I really enjoyed seeing Blair in person. There's something about her competitive nature that I saw in person that I was like, oh, okay. And my husband was like, she's really good. I was like, yeah, she is, third year in the program. Obviously, first year she was hurt, and now she's a redshirt sophomore, but she was a lot of fun to watch. But I do think Minnesota in that hosting conversation will be interesting. After Michigan went to Iowa and put together one of their worst performances of the season, I think Minnesota going down there and winning, that is important. We know that the committee values head-to-head wins, and so Minnesota having these wins over Ohio State and over Iowa are going to be really important. I think they're hosting, their ceiling might not be hosting, but if they make a deep enough run in the Big Ten tournament, we'll see what happens. All right, let's swing over to the SEC then. Kentucky was 14 in your rankings last week, and they've slipped to 16 this week. They've had a few narrow losses against top-tier SEC competition this season, most recently falling at home to Vanderbilt 81-79 on Sunday. Sabreena, despite these close defeats, Kentucky is still projected as a high tournament seed thanks to signature wins over LSU and Oklahoma. Do you think the Wildcats need a strong finish to avoid sliding further down the seed list, though?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good team to be talking about in the context of our hosting conversation because in the latest seeding reveal, which happened, we should say, like 10 days ago at this point, Kentucky was not in the top 16, but they were probably right off of the board.
They've got to be like 17.
Yeah, 17, maybe 18. And since then, we've seen Kentucky collect, a good win over Ole Miss. They have lost to Texas in that span, and they did just lose to Vanderbilt, which, a side note, every Kentucky-Vanderbilt game, just must-watch popcorn theater type of entertainment. I cannot get enough of these two teams playing against one another. So they close out their season against Auburn and South Carolina. I don't necessarily think that they're likely to beat South Carolina, so they're kind of reliant on other teams in this range sliding a little, like whether that's Ole Miss, who again they have the win over, whether that's Michigan State or Ohio State or Minnesota in this case. But you just think about, like you mentioning how difficult it is during the tournament when you don't have a lot of depth and you're traveling. Kentucky, another team that doesn't have a ton of depth, it would be so much easier for Kentucky if they were just able to stay in Lexington. And not have to worry about all of the vagaries that come with going on the road for the first 2 rounds of the tournament. But I look at Kentucky, I can't help but, like, they're so similar to me with TCU, and it's not just because Clara Silva and Clara Strack played with each other last year on Kentucky, but they have, like, the old and tall thing going. They have a lot of three-point shooting, a very dynamic pick-and-roll point guard with Toni Morgan, a nice center who can defend the crap out of the paint, and she's a little more offensively gifted, I think, than Clara Silva. But again, just like a very veteran team that has a lot of nice wins, but not any great wins. Like, they just kind of can't quite get over the hump against the South Carolina, Texas. Like, that win over LSU does stand out with that Toni Morgan game winner. But, even these last 2 games against Vanderbilt where they just barely lose both of those, this still feels to me like a second round ceiling type of team. Like, I don't think it would be a disservice to them if they didn't get to host because they haven't necessarily proven that they are capable of beating the very best. And it's too bad because I like a lot of players on this team and I think their style of play is a lot of fun. But at some point, you just got to get that marquee win. And if that's going to be South Carolina, which it's at Kentucky, so that's a good chance for them to collect a sort of a resume win there. But I do think that they're going to need one good SEC tournament win at the very least, if they don't beat South Carolina, to really secure their place in the top 16.
I mean, I feel like overall, a lot of, these teams that we've talked about so far, and I had this feeling when I was leaving Williams Arena yesterday, was like, we've talked about this before on the show. How many top 10 teams are actually in the top 10? And then you kind of have this grouping from 8 to 20 where it's like, those are really good teams. But what exactly is the Sweet 16 going to look like? I don't really know because I don't trust all of those teams in the 8 to 20 range. I mean, heck, I don't trust the teams in the 1 to 8 range all the time either, but I certainly trust them a lot more reliably than those teams in the 8 to 20 range. And so are the 1 to 7, I should say. And sometimes that 7 is like maybe up to like 4 or 5 teams in the top 10. I don't know how you feel about how many top 10 teams are actually in the top 10, but it'll be interesting to see what happens these next 2 weeks or next week and a half, just because this part of February is such a hard road for so many teams. Everyone is tired. Everyone's just trying to grind to the end of the season. You can see the end of the year, but it sort of feels like this mirage that's just like out there, and you have 2 more games and you just got to get through it. And then you have the conference tournaments. And so it'll be interesting to see sort of how many of these teams can sort of go into that like track mode of like you're coming around the final curve, just sprint to the end. All right. For now, UConn, South Carolina, and UCLA are sitting pretty as number 1 seeds. But who's sneaking into that final top spot? There are a few teams that have strong resumes, so we're here to talk through what is going to make a difference for these teams as we barrel towards March. And my God, we really are barreling towards March. Somehow it is the end of February. I don't really get it. But let's break down for our listeners some of the key factors that go into deciding who gets a number 1 seed. Sabreena, can you break down some of these factors?
Right. So we've talked a lot about net thus far, how the committee views your overall body of work, strength of schedule, quad 1 wins. Again, those are wins like either at home against a team in the top 25 of the net or on the road against a team in the top 40 of the net. Unfortunately, those numbers tend to change over the course of the season because teams get better or worse and fall in and out of quads. But yeah, not having bad losses, recent quality of play, all these sorts of things. And ultimately, there is just some sort of subjective nature of like, hey, we just think this team is better and deserves to be on a higher line. And that's how we're going to reward them over the course of the NCAA tournament.
I also want to bring up the WAB. This is a new metric they're using. I feel like it is the greatest piece of evidence we can use in terms of not everything needs to be an acronym. Like, anyways, it's called Wins Against the Bubble. And it's basically, it shows how many more or fewer wins a team has, according to the NCAA, compared to what a bubble team would average against that same schedule. And so it's sort of trying to find like the mean of what a team is, and then comparing every individual team. Are you getting more wins or less wins than that sort of bubble team? And so this is a metric where you want to have a much higher number. So if you look at the WAB, like UCLA is currently sitting at 14.26. They're leading the country in WAB points. I don't know what we're calling it. And then South Carolina's right behind them at 12.19. Again, I think it's a very silly thing, but it's an interesting metric to use. And it just sort of points to the fact that like the committee, again, is this human element. Like it's not a computer that is just looking at numbers and sort of punching out 1 through 68. It is, a group of individuals who all have biases and opinions and are given a set of instructions and criterion, and they go into a room and they debate and they argue and they figure out, seedings and placements. And so all of these different things are ways to look at a team. All right, so there are still a few teams battling for that final number 1 seed. We're taking a closer look at which teams are in a position to secure that spot. Sabreena, who do you think we should talk about first?
Well, we've mentioned UConn, South Carolina, and UCLA, and I think it's only fitting that we bring up the other team to make the Final Four in 2025, which was Texas. Also had a
Everyone
great
loves
season.
a good Final Four repeat. Everyone loves a good Final Four repeat.
There's a reason why they made the Final Four. There's a reason why they've been in the top 5 of the rankings all season thus far. They're number 4 in the net rating. They've got 9 quad 1 wins, which is, I think, second best in the country behind UCLA. They've beaten South Carolina. They've beaten UCLA. They've also lost to South Carolina, but that happened at a different time. They've beaten LSU. Again, also lost to LSU. But all of their losses are what you would consider good losses, right? They've lost to LSU, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt. And they have a lot of really high-quality wins. They also have, I think, a track record of having done well in the tournament. So it's not like the committee's and embarrass themselves by putting Texas as a number 1 seed and worrying that they're not going to do well in the tournament. And yeah, like just a team that's been very consistent over the course of the regular season. Their strength of schedule is 8th in the country, so they're beating up on a lot of good teams. And, you just look at that team, they defend really well. They get quality production out of a lot of players on their roster. They have a star in Madison Booker. It's all of the type of ingredients that you think qualify for a number 1 seed.
So I feel like, as always, Sabreena, I hate debating you when it comes to basketball things. Just because my natural inclination is like, well, if Sabreena said so, I believe her. But I think if there's one lesson that I took away from the committee's top 16 reveal a little over a week ago now, it's that head-to-head wins carry a lot of weight. And I think the Vanderbilt win over Texas is going to be doing a lot of work for the Commodores moving forward. Like how rough Texas looked in that game, because it's not just that, you know, they have that double-digit win over Texas. It's also how Texas looked in that game, that they weren't as competitive in that loss. And looking uncompetitive in losses is a huge deterrent and also a part of the criteria that the committee looks at. And so it's sort of that win, not only is it like carrying a ton of weight for Vanderbilt, I think it's almost doing double duty in terms of A, a win, B, Texas being uncompetitive in a loss. At the same time, I would say that Vanderbilt was pretty uncompetitive in a loss earlier this season, a nearly 30-point loss to South Carolina. But again, looking at the committee, recency matters. I think the fact that Duke was so high in that top 16 and that Vanderbilt was above Texas, it's sort of the what have you done for me lately matters. And so I do feel like that South Carolina loss will be a further memory in the eyes of the committee. And if Kentucky, you know, what they do the next few games matter. Like Vanderbilt should be rooting for Kentucky since they just beat them by 2 points. Like Vanderbilt is essentially rooting for everyone they've beaten so far,
including
to
Texas.
win. Yes, they're rooting for everyone at this point. Because, you know, if Kentucky takes down South Carolina, that's another huge boost for Kentucky, which will raise their net, which will obviously raise Vanderbilt's strength of schedule, their opponent net, all of these things that the committee can take into account. Like those things matter. But ultimately, when we're talking about Vanderbilt versus Texas, which we've done quite a bit, you know, I just feel like that head-to-head and the fact that Texas was uncompetitive, it's just sort of this double whammy that the Longhorns are going to really struggle to outrun in some ways, even though clearly, you know, they have a lot more working for them in their resume than Vanderbilt in some ways, but what they don't have is that head-to-head win.
Yeah, I guess that's where it comes down to like what you value the most, right? Because I would think beating UCLA, beating South Carolina, beating all the other teams that Texas has is going to resonate more, especially if you're talking about two no-brainer number one seeds in the Bruins and the Gamecocks, whereas Vanderbilt doesn't have those wins. Like
But it doesn't matter what you or I think. It matters what the committee thinks. And the committee had those facts at their hands when they put Vanderbilt ahead of Texas last week.
So it doesn't matter that Vanderbilt has lost to Georgia since then.
Nope, that does matter. And so then it sort of becomes, you know, that bad loss that is more recent, you know. No, I think the Georgia loss might actually come back to bite them in the ass. We'll see. But a road loss, I don't know. I am really curious to see how the committees, their next ranking comes out on March 1st, we should say. It'll be fascinating to see how things move around in this, specifically in the top 6. I think we'll be able to see some shifting. I think the other team we should probably discuss here would be LSU, right?
Yeah, I think we're pretty aligned that an SEC team is going to get this 4th number 1 seed. And the reason LSU is still in this conversation is because, again, the net loves them. They're 5th ahead of Vanderbilt, we should note. Their strength of schedule is always what it is, you know, only the 5 quad 1 wins, but they at least have, you know, a win over Texas, which head-to-head matters in these discussions, right? Yeah. They did lose to Vanderbilt.
Can we point out that their non-conference strength of schedule is 280? Like,
it's not good. It's not good.
Not very good at all. Like, literally ranks among not great teams when you're looking at that sort of the 270 to 290, not necessarily the teams that you want to be grouped in with. Sorry, continue.
Right, and I think LSU's already lost their opportunities to really make a big dent, you know, in terms of those marquee wins. They lost to South Carolina. They lost that second game against Texas. The only way I could really see LSU getting into this conversation is if they win the SEC tournament, because to do that, you presumably would have to go through 2 of South Carolina, Texas, and Vanderbilt. And Kim Mulkey historically hasn't really cared that much about the SEC tournament, and LSU historically hasn't been ranked that high in the NCAA tournament. They've topped out as a 3 seed even the year that they won the national title. So I'm putting them in here just because the net seems to really like them, but I don't really think they're in the Texas Vanderbilt conversation unless they somehow emerge as that SEC champion, because it just hasn't been the the precedent established by the committee in recent years when LSU has had a similar resume of like the absolute crap non-conference. But then, hey, we can beat some SEC teams.
So as it stands today, we're recording this on Monday afternoon, February 23rd. Obviously, a lot of basketball still to be played. Like, give me your confidence level ranking of like, think ahead, Selection Sunday.
Mhm.
If you just did like 1 through 3, like who has your most confidence for that 4th spot and your 3rd most confidence for that 4th spot?
Yeah, I think I'm most confident that Texas is going to get that 4th number 1 seed, then Vanderbilt, then really anybody you want to throw in that conversation. I thought, honestly, Duke might even have a chance to jump into this up until the bet against Clemson over the weekend. But yeah, I think it really comes down to Vanderbilt versus Texas. And I just want to highlight how important this 4th number 1 seed is. It's not like a cosmetic thing because the way the selection committee has to align the teams, like if there are 4 SEC teams or whatever in the top 16, they separate them as much as possible at the start of the bracket. So if you are the 4th number 1 seed, that means you are not a number 2 seed. Genius, I know, but that means that you were not in UCLA's region, basically, is what that says. So you're either going from, I get to be the number 1 seed and play like Michigan as my number 2, or, you know, let's say Louisville or Iowa or TCU, as opposed to being a number 2 seed and then having to play UCLA in the Elite Eight. That is a massive difference in opponent quality because I think we can agree that there's like a tiering between those top 5 teams and everybody else. So the stakes are actually pretty high here, I think, for teams to want a number 1 seed. And so I would expect Texas, Vanderbilt to take the SEC tournament very seriously to try to bolster their resumes for this particular thing. But yeah, as of now, I think it comes down to Texas. Like, I just don't think head-to-head should matter as much when Texas has the rest of that resume in their favor.
I agree with you. I think it's interesting to sort of look at, you know, for the committee to say we look at like the full complement of the season and what's going on and all of these different factors when clearly one element was weighing so heavily, even though, again, like I said, it's sort of 2 elements because of how poor Texas looked in that game at times. I think I'm with you. I think Texas ultimately ends up getting that 4th number 1 seed, and then there's going to be a lot of bemoaning about how, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Because I think at that point we are looking at potentially a repeat of the exact same Final Four as we had a year ago. But I think you bring up a good point about the SEC tournament, and let's see if LSU does take it a little bit more seriously, if there is a potential to get that 4th number 1 seed with a win in the SEC tournament. Like, if you're only going to watch one conference tournament, it should be the SEC because essentially it's its own little like mini national championship tournament in a conference tournament because getting that 4th number 1 seed matters that much because, like you said, it's basically your road out of not having to play UCLA or UConn to get to the Final Four. So you probably want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't agree more.
I also feel like, full disclosure for our listeners, you know, when we started this exercise and we were looking at different teams last week after our podcast meeting, we were like, oh, who's, you know, the 3rd team we should talk about behind Vanderbilt and Texas? And the team that came to mind for us was Michigan. Obviously, there's a reason we're not talking about them on Monday morning, and that is because they went down to Iowa City and had probably their worst performance of the year. I think, Sabreena, I don't know if you agree with this, but I felt like watching that game, when you talk about being uncompetitive in a loss, and sort of how at this point, you know, looking at Michigan's schedule, you know, they don't have that marquee win. We're talking about the importance of that earlier for Kentucky. I think I feel the same sort of way about Michigan. Like, they have some really, really good losses, like 3-point loss to
really
UCLA, 3-point loss to UConn, 3-point loss to Vanderbilt, like 3 3-point losses to 3 of the top 5 teams in the country. This is a team that I trust a lot in March, I think, even though they are such a young sophomore core team. Given that they have sort of seen up close, like, this is how you get to the Final Four so much this season. They haven't gotten over that hump yet. And then they went down to Iowa City, obviously, and met Ava Hayden, which didn't end well for them. But I think coming out of this weekend, I don't feel like Michigan is at all in the conversation for a number 1 seed anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think about Iowa, too, having this nice win over Michigan. They've got some pretty convincing wins over Ohio State, Michigan State, even Maryland, which was very convincing until Maryland did its, you know, normal comeback thing. But I really only believe in a Big Ten team making their way into this conversation if they can beat UCLA. And that would have to happen, presumably, in the Big Ten tournament championship. So yeah, like you said, the reason I like those SEC teams is because they all have one big win that you can point to. Like, this is how good we can be. And Michigan and Iowa don't really have that one. They have like a couple good losses and like some good wins, but not like the resume boosting wins that we've seen in the SEC. And that's why you just got to beat UCLA. Like, that's the only opportunity you have. And so I don't think we're going to see a Big Ten team in this spot on March 1st. But hey, you know, after whatever happens in Indianapolis, then we can revisit that discussion.
Well, I think looking ahead at just what the regular season holds for Michigan, it's something that, you know, no other team that we've talked about so far has, and that's 2 top 25 opponents in Ohio State and Maryland. And so they still have 2 great opportunities for big wins, a rivalry win potentially over Ohio State, and then a big win over Maryland. So an opportunity to bolster their net, their resume, those wins, not necessarily the marquee wins that would have happened with Vanderbilt, UCLA, or UConn, but still certainly good wins that can also give them momentum heading into the Big Ten tournament. All right, on the other side of this break, we have a listener question. All right, Nash sent in a question. Thank you for your question. They said, where would you rank Paige Bueckers among the best players in the world going into 2026? Not necessarily for future value, but present day rank. Would you put her above guards like Sabreena Ionescu and Jackie Young? Could she be 3rd overall behind Asia and Fee? Appreciate you a ton. Sabreena?
Yeah, all right. So just setting some context, Paige was 2nd team All WNBA last year, which admittedly is not a guard forward split. So already in the top 10 players in the WNBA, which I don't mean to eliminate all the other players in the world, but I just don't know enough about the other players in the world to say that any of them are definitively better than the ones in the WNBA. So let's just say she's already a top 10 player. I think the Jackie Sabreena comparison is interesting. I'm of the belief that Jackie Young is still the best guard in the WNBA. She did lose to Chelsea Gray in the one-on-one. Chelsea is more experienced, has the accolades, the clutch gene for sure. I think on a day-to-day basis, though, just what Jackie can do on both ends of the court is like the most impactful because she is an ace defender. She can play make, she can score. Paige, like, it's hard to gauge how good she was in Dallas almost because the games were of such little consequence, right? Like the last time Paige Bueckers played in a meaningful game was against South Carolina, maybe. So it's been a minute. And that's what I'm interested to see, just like how Dallas can surround her and like put her in situations where she actually has to be good. But I think she's already like a top. I'd put her ahead of Sabreena Ionescu just because of the shooting ability. Like, I know we think of Sabreena as like an ace 3-point shooter because of the 3-point shootout stuff, but like in game, it hasn't always translated. Yeah, I think Paige is probably already like a top 3-4 guard just because she can do everything. But I'm hesitant to put her like higher than some of the others because, again, like the games haven't meant anything in the WNBA.
I think it'll be interesting to watch her this season because just watching Unrivaled, it looks like she's bulked up a ton. I don't know if she's like publicly said how much muscle mass she has gained in this offseason, but like she just looks physically stronger. And I think in the WNBA, it's such a physical league. It's such a demanding league. Like that matters so much. And especially when you think about these rookies, someone especially like Paige, who played until literally the last day of the college basketball season and then going right into the draft and then right into their rookie campaign. Like it's just such a physically demanding experience that first year in the league for you. And I'm curious to see what she looks like, you know, this upcoming season. Granted, she played in Unrivaled this offseason, so it's not like she has been just like sitting in an ice bath since the fall. But I'm really curious to see how sort of a bulked up Paige, you know, obviously didn't do that much against Chelsea Gray in the one-on-one as we saw, as she got shut out. But I think, you know, some of, you know, how much of last season where she had one of the best rookie seasons in WNBA history, I think we've talked about that. But like, how many of her struggles were team related? How many of her struggles were sort of the longevity of her playing and never having a break? How much of it was needing to get a little bit more physical for what the league demands of players? You know, I think this like freshman to sophomore leap in the WNBA is more fascinating even than the freshman to sophomore leap in college basketball. So it'd be interesting to see.
One thing I will point out about Paige when she was at Team USA camp with Kelsey Plum, Caitlin Clark, Jackie Young, you know, the very best of the best. Chelsea Gray, like, she looked as good as anybody. And that was 5-on-5 context, you know, as opposed to what we're seeing at Unrivaled, 3-on-3 or even 1-on-1, which I don't think she got skunked. I think she got 2, but it was a pretty big blowout.
Oh, did she?
Yeah. Well, all we remember is the thumbs up to the ref on the way out. That's the iconic
I was gonna say that felt
experience.
Like it.
Yeah.
Sorry,
like a skunk. I agree with
Paige.
you.
My apologies.
But yeah, her ability to excel in that Team USA context, like, I think right now I'd only definitively put like Jackie, Chelsea, Kelsey Mitchell ahead of her. Just because like her size gives her so much advantages over a player like Kelsey Plum. And yeah, like everything else she can do is very impressive. So, I mean, hopefully Caitlin comes back healthy, and like that's a discussion we get to have again, you know, that we've been having since 2021. But for now, like, yeah, top 5 guard, I think.
All right, that's all we've got for you today. We'll be back on Friday with more discussions around women's hoops. Until then, if you haven't already, please follow our show. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe and tell your friends to check us out. And while you're at it, give us a rating, drop a comment. We'd love to hear from you. On behalf of The Athletic, Sabreena Merchant, I'm Chantel Jennings. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to No Offseason. To hear more, be sure to like and subscribe. We drop new episodes every Tuesday and Friday.